Gather round friends, there's a new downscaler in town. Analog Ways TVC401, better known as the Tetra Vio, is a commercial up and downscaler, and like the Koryu 2, DVD-O, and Dido Jr. can be programmed with custom resolutions. A paisano in the US came across the Tetra Vio on their search for a universal transcoder, found that it couldn't properly handle a 240p input, but then discovered it can output 240p by custom timings, and he kindly shipped it to me to validate its downscaling capabilities. The full rack length accommodates for an impressive set of connections. There's inputs for composite, component, or RGB sync on green through RCA, S-Video, and component or RGB with separate sync through DB15, and that's just the front. On the back is a second DB15 input, more component and RGB inputs through BNC, another BNC for SDI, and with the right adapter can take composite, S-Video, component, RGB, or direct HDMI. If you're not already blown away, there's two RGB outputs through DB15 and DVI that can display simultaneously without dropping the peak-to-peak 700mV RGB levels and the TTL level C-Sync. Just be sure that sync runs through an inline resistor to attenuate the voltage to safer levels if connecting to a consumer SCART TV or switcher. So in all, you get two simultaneously scaled outputs, plus unscaled source video resolution pass-through, which sounds like a CRT streamer's wet dream. Unfortunately, the composite and S-Video outputs are only capable of PAL and NTSC in at least 15 kHz, and will not output custom resolutions. I guess the Extron Emosha is still good for something, as the only downscaler thus far to natively output 240p through these signal formats. The unit handles audio through RCA and 3.5mm auxiliary, but needs an external audio DAC to extract it from HDMI, either by a powered HDMI to video pass-through to keep the video digital, or an HDMI to VGA DAC. Then run audio through the unit so it syncs with the video, or bypass the scaler and deal with any audio to video desynchrony. The rear exhaust fan adjusts its speed depending on the internal temperature, and it does get a little noisy at times. Commercial scalers that were generally left on 24/7 don't often have a power button, so this is a nice feature. All the menu navigation is done by titty twisting the front dial and pressing the two buttons beside it. Up to 8 custom resolutions are programmable, and even though the manual alludes to interlacing being an option, only progressive is selectable. But not to worry, 480 and 576i are already a default output resolution. There's two ways to program custom timings. The simple method that only requires vertical frequency, horizontal width, and vertical height. But if the numbers don't quite equal 15 kHz and the CRT can't interpret the signal, there's full sync timings to alter the HV front and back porch to hone in the signal. Using the two links that are listed in the description, go to the SourceForge X timing site and input the frame rate, horizontal and vertical pixel size, copy the mode line, head over to the ePanorama site to paste it, and hit calculate. Scroll down, and these are the full resolution parameters. In all input scenarios, from 480 to 1080p, and both custom 240p output and the factory program 480i, lag rolls from 24 to 39 milliseconds, effectively 1.5 to 2.5 variable frames, giving the Tetra Vio the unfortunate title, the Lord of the Lag. Given that the Tetra Vio is line blending, it preserves overall more vertical detail than a line decimating scaler. But unlike the Koryu 2's seamless handling of all input resolutions, the Tetra Vio works best when you program 240p that matches the same horizontal pixel size as the source video. For example, text is practically illegible when downscaling 1280 by 720 to 720 by 240. But when the custom resolution matches the horizontal width, the downscaled image was not only acceptable, but exceptional, with all horizontal pixels making it through safely to the other side. Getting the image to center and fill the screen feels like a complete crapshoot. The auto centering button generally works well to iron out uneven scaling, otherwise there's HV size and position adjustments within the blanking menu, but use them sparingly as they'll affect the pre-downscaled image and can wreak havoc on perfect pixels. Strangely though, these controls aren't available when you input HDMI through DVI. There is a separate zoom function, but it can only shift and resize the resolution that's in a predefined window. Both the zoom and blanking controls shift the vertical field averaging, handy for precisely blending two adjacent fields for line doubled content. For more rigid adjustments, there's under and overscan, as well as aspect ratio for the input and output, including a fill option to stretch to a 4:3 height, and a 1:1 output which retains the initial 16:9 format, keeping the aspect ratio police satisfied. Without the HV blanking menu and the zoom's limited practicality, you can still achieve full screen output if you get crafty. For example, when downscaling Rising Hell on the Nintendo Switch in 720p, the left horizontal blanking was only cleared up when I used the overscan feature. Within the image controls is an unfortunate and intrusive sharpness filter that produces haloing around character outlines. By default, it's set to 50%, but turning it down to 0 obliterates all detail. And I found 35% to be the sweet spot that reduced haloing to retain adequate sharpness. The zoom controls can be saved and recalled easily, and are plenty robust to stretch and fill the PSP's windowed 480p output. The image settings appear to save by themselves and are tied to the input to output scenario, and according to the manual, up to 40 presets are stored until you reach the limit where it overwrites the oldest preset. As shown in the Extron Emotia episode, Analog Way and Extron tend to share PCB design, but I'm not entirely sure if there's an Extron equivalent to the Tetra Vio. And if there's one thing I'm sure of, there's no traces of the Extron Emotio's color banding and compression, with all of the Dreamcast 240p test suite RGB values having a distinct separation to its adjacent tone. Although line blending downscalers are a little softer than line decimators, the biggest benefit is that just about anything looks great in 15 kHz, and is head and shoulders over a line decimator when downscaling non-240p pixel art. The OSSC Pro decimating 720 to 240p results in a sham of vertical shimmer, and while its 480i output is easier on the eyes, the Tetra Vio's 240p output makes it seem like this modern retro game was made for CRTs. Again, be sure that the horizontal width matches the inputs, otherwise the loss in horizontal pixel assets will also cause horizontal shimmer. As for the overall detail compared to the tvONE 750, the Tetra Vio is a little sharper and produces less blooming. I wonder if the mandatory sharpness filter has anything to do with it. If you're wondering how line blending fares for 240p restoration, as long as the vertical scale is an integer of the source video and the vertical blanking is left at 240p, it should look relatively on par to a line decimator. Don't let the Neo Geo Mini's bilinear filter fool you though, as it retains similar sharpness on the tvONE 750 and the OSSC Pro. The age-old question of will X amount of lag be noticeable to me is really subjective, and you may just need to play with something that's known to have lag to find out yourself. I can only speak for myself in that I'm not sensitive to at least 2 frames of lag, and you may be surprised how well you can intrinsically adapt. And I only blame myself for being terrible at rhythm games. Grading the Tetra Vio as a downscaler, it accepts 480 to 1080p, can output 240p and 480i, but is hindered by up to 2.5 frames of rolling lag. Once you find a fine balance of the sharpness filter and get the horizontal scaling just right, the 240p output is clean with no detrimental video artifacts. Picture controls are almost never simple on these commercial scalers, but there's enough options that should have the image filling the CRT, therefore the Tetra Vio scores 8.25 out of 10. While that's an impressive score, my thoughts on the Tetra Vio as a viable downscaler are still mixed, mainly due to its inconsistency to just work. 480i output was most problematic, where it's a toss of a coin if the image displays correctly or gets torn in half and warps to the either side. A power cycle usually fixes it, but I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that I want my stuff to just work. Custom resolution behavior can also be unpredictable, possibly due to the labile vertical frequency that I'm assuming changes itself when the HV blanking is altered from a completely separate menu. With just a fraction more lag, it performs similar to the Choreo 2 scalers, which is a big compliment to the Tetra Vio. But with inconsistent reliability, it ain't a Choreo killer. The bevy of connections and ability to output 2 scaled feeds and pass through the source resolution makes this a unique scaler above the rest. But if the I/O and simultaneous outputs don't justify the asking price, look for a compatible Choreo 2 instead. Thanks all for watching, and happy gaming.